Welcome to Creating a Disruption, the podcast that focuses on ways to disrupt the traditional classroom by using engaging teaching and learning strategies. I'm Brian Hall, Associate Professor of English and Coordinator of Studio 101 on the Metro campus of Cuyahoga Community College. And with me, as always, is the co-host, Kara DePaul. How are you doing today?
Doing very well, thank you, right?
No problem. And you are the Director of Academic Professional Development.
That's right.
So, very good. Today's guest is Dr. Margie Lehnert, Assistant Professor of Biology. She has been with the college for 8.5 years. First of all, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
And second, in what ways do you disrupt the classroom?
Oh, that's a lofty question. I feel like in my time that I've been here, if I had to summarize all of the different pieces of my work in the past 8.5 years, that really all I'm trying to do is teach students to be a scientist. And being a scientist is much different than learning how to be a scientist, right? You're doing, it's an active process. And so I really try to bring that to my students, whether it's in the classroom or with experiences outside of the classroom.
With it being an active process, are students pretty much on board with the active part of that? Like, is it easy for them to go, oh, yeah, that makes sense?
I think it depends which students we're talking about and which class we're talking about. Because I do a lot of things with students where they already know that science is where they want to go and what they want to do. But then, I have non-major students that I teach, and then I have students that want to go into health careers, and they aren't as familiar with this idea that science is applied and you have to do. And it's not just memorizing facts and regurgitating those facts. It's learning how to use those facts to problem solve. And so sometimes they're on board, and sometimes it's a little bit of a struggle, and it's a process for everyone. But I think that for the most part, they've responded very, very positively.
Great. What's one activity or a couple activities that you've done that you really see students get really engaged with?
So one of the biggest things that I've done in a traditional classroom, and not courses where I have students that know they're going to be scientists or outside the classroom, is that students need to learn how to problem solve. What I've figured out in my time at Tri-C, a little bit of a story, is that I started teaching anatomy and physiology, and I would put extended response essay questions at the end of their exams where they have to take this information that they learned and apply it to a new scenario. And people would skip it. They wouldn't even try. They would just be panicked. They would say, I don't have enough time on the exam to answer this question or whatever it is, because really what I figured out is that they don't know how to answer the question. And that was kind of a mind blow for me, because it started with, here's these essay questions. And then it was like, okay, I'm going to give you the essay question ahead of time. And people are still skipping it. And then it's like, okay, I'm going to give you the essay question and we're going to answer it. And then they're still not able to put that together for the test. And so for me, I'm like, okay, let's rewind, because when I'm giving them the essay question and we're answering it together, that's not what I want from them, because then it's another, hey, here are some facts, memorize, regurgitate. And so I took a step back and I'm like, all right, let's just pretend students don't know how to apply something that they've learned to a new scenario. What would I do? How would I approach that? And so I really came up with a process that it fits specifically for one of my courses, but it's taking the scientific method and just kind of rewording it and putting it in steps that apply directly to the course that I was teaching. Because what I've also learned is that if you ask or tell a student that you're going to talk about the scientific method, they zone out, because they've heard the scientific method since they were in third grade, right? They've learned it multiple times as they've gone through their educational career. So then you get to college and you're like, hey, we're going to talk about how to use the scientific method, and you've lost them already. So if you don't approach it like that, and you're like, hey, this is going to help you learn how to approach these problems when you feel like you don't know the answer. And then they're like, oh, okay, you're helping us with our tests. Even though I'm not giving them answers, I'm teaching them how to answer. the question and how to problem solve and how to approach. So I think that that's been, once students understand that it's a process, so there's steps. Whenever there's steps for something, you can practice it and get better. And so when we start at the beginning of the semester, it's learning the steps. And then every week we're like applying it to different questions and going through the process. So the idea then is that by the time they get to that first exam, even if they look at the essay question and they feel like they don't know what it is, they can kind of take a deep breath and be like, okay, what are the steps? I've practiced for this, so they feel more prepared. And then they're learning to problem solve, and that helps everyone.
Right. And that has worked out for the students going through the steps?
It has. I think that some students disappear because it's not what they're looking for. They would rather memorize and regurgitate and have that be it. But other students thrive. And I've had students come back to me and say, oh, I'm in, the next class in my sequence, and why don't you teach it? Because they want that process again. They want to be challenged in the way that they felt like they were challenged. And it's regurgitate. It's here's facts and here's regurgitate, just tell me facts. And that doesn't happen often, because I think that I have a lot of counterparts that are on the same page and that they do something similar just in different ways, in ways that they figured out have worked for that. Because application is important in science. But yeah, sometimes students have a hard time, but I really feel like for the most part, they're eager to learn. And when you put it in the framework of you have to problem solve in your health career, whatever it is that you want to do, like you have to be able to apply. Then those that are really serious about what they want to do, they take that in and they're like, oh, okay, the more I do now, the better it's going to train me for what I want to do later in life anyway.
Do you often see, like, when they respond to one of the essay questions, once they've learned the steps and how to apply it, do you see them responding like kind of like step by step? Are they able to kind of package it together? I'm just thinking of like kind of like the like English side of it and teaching like all the writing courses that you teach, and then like the biology side of it. Are they able to synthesize and put it?
They are, and I get some really interesting answers. So basically what we do when I'm trying to teach them how to problem solve is it's like the first step is, read your question and take a deep breath and just know, okay, I wouldn't have asked this question if I didn't prepare you to answer this question. So even if you're feeling like you don't know the answer, just breathe for a second. And then it's, all right, keywords. Just look for your keywords. Look for those words that we've spent time on in class, that are processes that we've learned. And even if you know nothing else and you feel like you don't know the question and can't answer the question, tell me something about those keywords, because it obviously revolves around those ideas. In anatomy and physiology, like biology has a lot of themes that and patterns that are repeated in different levels. But anatomy and physiology is all about how what the structure does reflects its function. And if you lose the structure, if the structure changes for any reason, it's not going to be able to perform the function that it needs to do. So a lot of my questions that I ask on my exams are in that framework. I ask about a structure and tell them to tell me about the function, or vice versa. And so if they can keep that pattern in mind, then when they read a question, they may not understand it, but, oh, they're talking about a structure. Okay, how does this apply to function? Or you're talking about a function, how does it apply to structure? And so that really helps rein them in and rein that anxiety in. I know we all have a lot of students that have testing anxieties. And so when you're put on the spot, they panic. So that helps them like ground themselves, I think, having the process. And then what really does happen, and it's so much fun, is that I get answers to questions, because ultimately what they're doing is they're hypothesizing. I don't even care if they give me what I'm looking for in terms of like, hey, I wrote this question because I have this answer in mind. There are other answers that are possible. And so when I get those answers on exams, I get really excited. I'm like, I never thought of this, or this is a really different perspective than how I was approaching it, but it works. And you showed me the logic, you supported what you're saying, and that is what is most important. Because now I know that you can problem solve with any problem that you're, faced with in your job. And that's what's important.
How do you give feedback to students like that? Like, do you address it in class? I mean, I guess it probably depends on
so what we do a lot with that particular exercise is that we'll do group work. And so if it's a class that meets twice a week, we'll have small groups on the first meeting, and I'll give them a list of 4 or 5 questions to answer in a group. And they'll all spend time, I'll go around and I'll talk to each one, and whatever question they're on, they usually have questions about it, they're stuck on something, and so we'll talk about it. And I try to make sure I'm talking about a different question with each group so that at least we have one group that has a good understanding of it. And it's fun to see them bounce off ideas from each other as they're talking through their groups. And then the second meeting, we'll usually do the same type of practicing, but it's as a whole class. So I'll come with questions that are deeper and require some synthesis and application than what we've talked about so far, because they should be further in the information that they're learning for that week. And then we come together and we do it as a class. So it's worked out pretty well that way, I think.
Do you ever have students, like I know group work can be challenging and can also be very exciting for students and for us as faculty, right? Like involved.
If it's working well, there's so much energy, right, in the
Yes.
room, positive energy.
Right.
Yes. And some groups have more positive energy than others because
It's
some
true.
groups are working and some groups aren't quite there. So
Yeah.
Have you ever had like a time where maybe it didn't go so well?
yes, I had an entire class that was very quiet.
So how did you work through that?
Oh, it's so
Because I think it's very common for a
It
lot of
is,
us. To
it
sit there and
is,
like,
you
this is
know.
great, I've done this many times, it's worked out. And then you're in that class and you're going, what do I need to do?
right. And I think that what I've mind tricked myself, like a Jedi mind trick, and I'm like, okay, I shouldn't be the one feeling uncomfortable right now. Like I'm asking you a question and I'm just gonna not. And then I transfer it to them and then I just wait. I have waited for probably 45 seconds, it feels really, really long. And I might try to trigger something else in there to help stimulate that. But usually you start to see, in my experience, you start to see some of the quieter students decide that they're gonna say something. And then you always have the students that are good students, they feel bad for you. So they're gonna
Right.
talk. Yeah, they're gonna help you out a little bit. But it is hard. And I feel like when that happens, I try to catch them in that first meeting of the week and talk to them more. Because if they're more comfortable with you and they think that maybe they feel that you're more approachable, then they're more willing to kind of put themselves out there in class where maybe they wouldn't normally have done that. So the smaller group work in the beginning is helpful to the larger group work at the end of the week. So that's helped.
Yeah. I remember in graduate school taking a pedagogy class, and they called that the pedagogical pause, where you just don't say anything and wait, because sooner or later someone is just not going to be able to take it anymore. So something will be said.
Yeah, and that happened to me in grad school. I think that's how I learned it. But for me, I was thinking during that time, like it was a difficult applied question that he would be asking, and I'm just like, the wheels are turning, but there's a lot of pieces to work through, and I needed that time to process. So I'm just pretending that that's what's happening.
Right.
They're processing, and I'm sure some of them are, that they're just taking that time to really try to figure it out.
And I think that's good for you to be able to take the step back as the teacher, be like, okay, we're going to figure this out. Because I think sometimes maybe frustration sets in. Because this happened recently in my class. They went into groups, no one was talking. And then I immediately I feel that little bit of frustration and going, what's going on? And then I realized, wait a second, similar to you, I don't think they know exactly what I want them to do.
No, they don't know where to start.
And then taking that step back and sort of leading them through it step by step, and it got better. So that's great that you were able to recognize that and work that into your class going forward.
And it helps because what happens is, when you're teaching a human bio class or an anatomy and physiology class, you tend to get questions that people have built up over their entire lives because they're humans and they've lived as a human. And so they have lots of questions about just, random things. And you'll hit a section and they're like, oh, this happened to my grandma 3 years ago. Like, what do you think about this? And sometimes I'll take that question because it's like, it hits on something that we worked on in the past, and I'll throw it back to the class and I'm like, what do you think? Because sometimes I don't know the answer. And we're just hypothesizing together. And I'll let them know, like, I don't know, but let's talk this through and talk about what we know about the structures of this particular thing and what their function is and what could be something that could be happening here. We don't know if we're right, but we're still problem solving because it's possible based on the logic and the facts that we know. So it becomes really fun that way too. Then you get to like kind of, just take them down the route.
You're teaching them how to apply, like it's like a real life scenario, right? Of like, okay, we can take this and apply it and like reinforce those steps with them.
Yeah, and then often I'll take some of those questions and those become questions for the next semester that I ask other students, like, that was a really great question. I'm going to remember that. And I write it down and that becomes part of my question repertoire that I have for my students to answer and practice with.
So as you have students going through this and you're working together, is it also opportunities to sort of explore how people get information? Because they might talk about something that's happened to them or a family member and you're like, okay, where did that come from? And it's a good exploration of information literacy at that point.
Yeah, well, and you never know what you're gonna get, especially in non-majors. Like that's where you really get off the wall questions just about anything human related. I sometimes have to remind my students that I'm not a medical doctor.
Yeah.
And so and it's like, well, my grandma said this, or like they know what they know based on their experience. And then that's part of any science class is teaching them that their experience is their experience, but that doesn't mean that whoever taught you this knew the facts of whatever it is that they're talking about. So then it's like, what are our primary resources here, and we go through kind of learning about that in all of the science classes too, so in the biology classes. But it's fun. It's fun when you just get there's a lot of character that comes out in some of these questions.
Sometimes you agree that those classes have more energy.
Oh yeah,
Because everyone's
I love non-majors.
Yeah, they're really involved in the conversation, and you're like, oh right, where did you get that information from? Oh, my Uncle Joe. All right, what does your Uncle Joe do? No, okay. Well, let's think about this a little bit more.
Right. Well, and because they don't have the science background, like for the non-majors that I teach, obviously in biology, that's where you get such wide-ranging questions, and then they're so interested because they don't have anything to fall back on in terms of like the facts of things.
Right.
Whereas when you hit your majors, I love my major students too, but they have that fundamental knowledge. So we get to go more rigorous with them, but the excitement I feel like is the non-majors, and that's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So you teach primarily A&P?
I teach a lot of A&P and then I teach a lot of non-majors, human bio. Okay. So different levels of similar material.
Okay. And you've done, I know you've received a lot of like faculty innovation grants and so forth to do things at your campus. Can you like talk a little bit about like some of the projects you've done at your campus?
Yeah, so once we kind of leave being in a classroom with a registered class, I've had students, as I think most of the science faculties, in any faculty actually, you have your students that are really excited about whatever it is you're teaching them. And you're like, oh, you'd be so good at, being a scientist or doing research or whatever it is. And so when I first really started in my tenure track position, as a tenure track faculty member, I had two students that, they wanted to transfer to a four-year institution and they wanted to get research experience. And I'm like, okay, let's figure out what tools are available. And so I applied for, I think it was a mini tech grant, is what it was called at the time. But I applied for an internal tri-seat grant, and we were awarded a really nice dissecting microscope that would allow us, what we were using it for was we wanted to be able to look at individual mosquitoes under the microscope and identify the species, because different species carry different diseases. So you have to know what species it is if you're ever going to look at anything past that, okay? So we got a really nice dissecting microscope and a bunch of equipment to catch mosquitoes around campus. And then the next year, I applied for an extension of that because we had more students that were interested, but we only had one microscope. And the first thing you have to do is identify mosquitoes, or you can't, like I said, you can't do anything else. So we got another microscope in that grant, which was really great. And then let's see, I wrote a FIG grant for, we have a pollinator garden now at West Campus. And if you're ever at West Campus and you get to be by the bee parking lot, there's some really beautiful signage. That was what most of the grant went towards was, we got some flowers and some plants, but the signs, educational signs on the monarch life cycle, for example, and just pollinators of Northeast Ohio and what you might see if you're out there and you're in the garden walking through and looking at the flowers. Here's what you might see while you're there. And I have plans. I created a course called Insect Biology, which will be offered for the first time as that course this fall. Hopefully it runs.
Okay.
But I'm hoping now that it's also OT 36 approved, by the way, so tell your students. But yeah, the plan is that we're gonna use the pollinator garden to observe, to look at the insects, because part of that class is learning the different kinds, but pictures can only do so much,
Right.
and it's just, you're gonna remember it better as a learner when you get to see it for real and not just in a book or on a PowerPoint or something like that. So that's the plan, is that we're going to use that garden a lot to try to just get out there and see all of the things that we're talking about in class
Right.
about it. So it should be a lot of fun. I'm excited about that one.
So I would imagine, do you ever encounter students that maybe don't know that they have like the inherent interest or strengths to like become a researcher, right? Like you mentioned you had a few students that wanted to apply to a 4-year school. Like, do you feel like a lot of your students come to you and maybe have no idea that they have that kind of inclination, or that they?
I do. I think so. And I'm sure this has happened to anyone that's taught a non-majors class, where you see a student that just thrives, and maybe they thought they hated science or whatever discipline you're teaching, but then they're reconnecting with it, and and it's a different kind of topic, but at the same time, I feel like sometimes it's because students have just had a really bad experience for whatever reason. And I think with students in science, I'll get a lot of students that say, well, I had a teacher in high school that made me feel stupid, so I just figured science wasn't for me. And it breaks your heart. But then you hope that because they're thriving, that you're helping to show them, like, look, you can do this, and they're doing it, and they're having so much fun. And so then they'll come back, a semester later and say, oh, I changed my major. And you're like, yes, that's what I wanted.
You converted.
Yeah, like if I can, for non-majors, if you can just be enthusiastic about science and show how much you love science, it's really hard to not feel the same way. And that's with anything, like you can be so disinterested in whatever it is, but if the person teaching you about it is excited, you're like, okay.
Right.
Okay, I'll get into this, I'm listening. All right, you got my attention, and so that's my goal with non-majors. Is just if students walk away not hating science and maybe finding one thing at least that they loved about it, then I feel like I've done a good job.
I had a geology professor in undergrad, the most energetic guy ever. And I would sit in that class and go, this is amazing. And it was 7:45 in the morning, which was even extra amazing that he was that energetic. God, he loved this. He loved the subject matter.
Yeah.
Sometimes I wonder with some of those students, like their experiences in like maybe high school, it's more of the regurgitating, right? And then getting an opportunity to actually apply it, it sort of clicks more. Like, boy, this is more interesting because I'm actually doing something.
Well, and that makes sense because it's with the non-majors that convert to wanting to study science more. It's usually when I have them in lab. And here we are, we're looking at things, we're holding stuff, we're running experiments, and you're just like, cool, this is cool. Like my favorite part in the earlier class, like topics that we cover, I guess, in human bio is that when we get to the skeleton and I get to show them, okay, you're looking at models that are plastic, but here's a real bone, and they're holding it, and they can see the differences, and you're like, wow, and they're passing it around, and I have students email me sometimes where I'll assign like videos for them to watch that are documentaries about a topic, and they'll be like, I made my mom watch this with me, and it's just like, that's so great.
Yeah.
And they get so excited about it that they're telling you about their excitement.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's fun.
So you've done like a number of different types of assignments and activities in your class. Part of creating the podcast is also talking about things maybe didn't work the way you wanted them to work, didn't go as planned. Do you have any activity or assignment that sort of falls into that category? What was it, if you don't mind us asking? And what did you learn?
There's always
about-
one that comes to mind. And it ultimately just revolves around communication. And we all know that you have to be as explicit as possible when you're trying to tell your students what it is you want to do. So I was trying a new exercise, and what I really wanted them to do was explain the steps of cellular respiration, which is a process. It's a difficult process. There's a lot of steps. It was just one part of cellular respiration. And so I asked them a question, and I tried to phrase it in terms of like, I think I used the Cavaliers in there as some part of the example. But basically the answers I got were like, they died. Like it didn't happen because they died. And I'm just like, no. Like, and that's like everyone had like
Right.
this crazy bizarre answer that was so far from the physiology that's happening at a cellular level that I'm like, all right, this didn't work. And so I went home and I like rewrote the question to try to get them to answer it the way that I was looking for. And so I think that for most of us, when things don't work, it's because it wasn't explicit enough for students to understand what you're asking from them. And so that was like a big lesson there because it was just so ridiculous and no one had any idea what they were supposed to be doing. And that's why they all kind of came to the same conclusion, which wasn't what I was looking for. So it's just a matter of like, in my experience, most of the time something doesn't work. It's the instructions and it's communication. So then it's reevaluating, like, are there patterns in what they did give you? Because if you see patterns, then you know it's you,
Right.
you know that you did not communicate it well. And then it's just rewriting and trying again and hoping that it's going to work better the next time and keeping notes of what's working and what's not. And that's why I think teachers are better teachers 10 years in than they are right in the beginning, because it's just so hard. You're learning so much, you know, and all my favorite professors have been professors for years and years and years because it's just such a long learning process. But once you get there and you put it all together, it's great.
What's the biggest change you've seen since you started teaching to now? Since you talked about sort of like the longer you've been doing it.
In me or in students?
And you as a teacher.
In
sort
me
of.
as a teacher.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's a really good question. I feel like a lot of the fundamentals are similar. I want my students to succeed and I want to do what I can to help them. But I think how I help them is different because I know how to help them better than I did when I first started. I just think that, when you see a student that is afraid of science, it's like, oh no, they're afraid of science. And when I first started, I didn't know how to help them not be afraid of science. Right. And so then you learn things as you go through and you have students that are in similar situations and that really helps. I just think that I know how to help students better and I can see the patterns of what's happening with a student. And then I have that past experience to build upon to do better for this student, in whatever situation that they're in. And I think that that's probably just typical for teaching, but it's good.
I think it's really special when you can see that transition from a student where they can move through that period of anxiety, right? Because you see this in all the disciplines, math anxiety, English anxiety, public speaking. And when you can kind of like teach them some tools and techniques to help them get through that on their own, right? Because it's ultimately up to them to be able to do. It's like you see kind of like the barriers just like fall away and they're like, oh, they're no longer focused on their own apprehensions or anxieties or angst, like we were talking about earlier, like it just melts away and then they can become more present and focus. And you mentioned how you take notes after class. Like have you ever gone back to some of your old like teaching journals or like notes and like looked, where you were your first year tenure track versus now?
Yeah, I mean, when I first started teaching A&P, my background is insects. So humans and insects are very different, if you didn't know. But the processes are similar, like the how they function are similar. And so when I first started teaching AP, it's more of survival. It's I have to make sure that I can be the expert in presenting this information so that if I have questions, I can answer them to the best of my ability. So the first couple semesters, maybe first couple years, it's just making sure you know the information. And so now that we're past that, I can see how can I teach this information better. And that's when the whole process kind of arose, because I saw the pattern over time of students having a hard time knowing how to apply information. And so enough experience shows you that that's a pattern. So then you go through like, how can I attack that pattern? Like, how can I help? And you're teaching them how to help themselves, and then their fears and anxieties melt away, and then the excitement shows through. And that's really fun to see when you have students that are getting excited about asking questions that no one knows the answer to in the classroom anyway. We don't know the answer, but they're just having fun going through the process of asking questions. And then they're having fun answering, even though we don't know if these answers are true or not. They could be possible, but that doesn't mean that's what's happening. And it's just so fun when you see them, like you said, like flourish and just help themselves. It's great.
So speaking of like excitement, like what are you excited about? What are you maybe trying in future semesters, or things that you'd like to give a try to or work with other faculty on?
I'm really excited about this insect course, and I really hope that it gets to run because, like I said, my background is in entomology and study of insects.
Is it face-to-face?
It is. It's face-to-face. There is no lab component yet, but that's the next step. But it's exciting because I feel like I get excited about science and biology overall and in general, but this is my area. So there's like extra excitement. And I tell my students that are enjoying my classes, I'm like, hey, if you're enjoying this, like, this is me talking about humans. Come hear me talk about insects, it's going to be so much better. So I'm really excited about that. I've actually been working with, it's related, the green team at Tri-C, obviously we're at Tri-C, at the Western campus, that's what I meant to say. The green team at the Western campus, we are putting on a big in-person Earth Day event next week on Tuesday and Wednesday. And we got a grant for that actually. But we have a lot of activities going on and a lot of possibilities for students to walk away with some really cool prizes. We have gift baskets that one of them is like a tabletop composter that you can put in your kitchen, and they're really neat.
That's super cool.
It's really neat. It's like
So a chance for students and faculty.
no, I know. You should see my office. It's so full of stuff and everything I want. I'm like, I want to keep that. I want that. But no, we're going to make sure that students win.
Is this a scavenger hunt?
That's part of it. Yes. Yeah. Kirsten has been working really hard on the scavenger hunt portion of it. So there's the idea is that you have multiple activities where you can go and complete an activity and learn about something. So like my station that I'm in charge of is for the pollinator garden, and just talking about native pollinators and how some of them are endangered and what different things are affecting insects and why they're on a decline. But at my station, they can color a butterfly. Like it's like color a pollinator, and then we're going to put them onto a board so everybody can see all the different things that people come up with butterflies. But you can also walk away with wildflower seeds, like a packet of little wildflower seeds, so you can go home and you can plant your own pollinator garden and help the pollinators, right? So that's just one station of, I think we have 4 or 5. And so different activity, and you're learning different things. You come and put stickers on a reusable water bottle and take that home with you and have that for the rest of your school time at Tri-C. And then all of our gift baskets that we have correlate to the different activities that we're doing as like an ultimate prize for that. There's also gonna be therapy dogs, so you should come just for the dogs. But it's been a lot of work, but really fun. We have I think there's 11 or 12 of us now in Green Team at West, and everyone's been working really hard, just putting it together and making sure we're gonna be able to pull it off.
This is next week, next Tuesday,
the 19th, 18th and 19th, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, big fall. Yeah.
So anybody at Western Campus or any student that is at West, you can bring your class through?
Yes.
Teaching during
Yeah.
that time?
Yeah, yep, and a lot of us that are putting this together are bringing our classes in, and that's hopefully gonna draw more students in. Because we all know how empty and big the school feels when there's not a lot of students just in those group areas where we used to see a lot of students.
Right.
And so we're hoping to maybe make it feel a little bit like it used to. Get some students engaged. So,
Well, I love scavenger hunts and therapy dogs, so I'm all for it.
right, I know, that's like, we're
We know where
giving
you'll
stuff
be.
away. I mean, they can walk away with so many things that are just, you're gonna learn about sustainability and you're gonna have toys and stuff to walk away with, so.
Yeah, It's great.
So hopefully we'll
awesome.
get them in, yeah, but that's really exciting, we're excited about that.
Are you open to faculty connecting with you, contacting you about anything?
Absolutely,
All right.
yeah, absolutely,
Pollinator garden or anything that
Yeah.
you're doing?
yeah, that sounds
Awesome.
great.
Well, thank you so much for your time.
You are so
This was a
welcome.
great conversation. Hope the rest of your semester goes well, and I hope your class runs in the
Yes,
fall.
yes, me too, thank you so much.
We'll have to come see the pollinator garden in the fall when it's kind of
Right,
more in bloom and
yeah,
all the.
it's just
fun
getting
things.
started right now,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, thank you very
Thank you
much.
so much for
Thank
having
you.
me.